Lesson 6, critical thinking. So the benefits of this lesson, well, a lot of ideas aren't that good, including our own, of course, and not everybody's intentions aren't always good. So when people produce ideas, maybe those ideas are questionable, they're not very strong, and maybe the motivation of those people producing ideas is not that virtuous either. So a critical repose, an ability to critique and to understand the strengths and weaknesses of ideas and maybe suggest improvements is incredibly valuable, and also can lead to a lot of creativity. So within the model, we are now moving to the second letter of ATAG. So we've looked at absorbing and acquiring knowledge in the prior lessons. Now we're moving on to the T for test. We're looking at testing ideas. Now, when you're testing ideas, you're essentially producing a critique. And a really good critique has 4 main sections. First of all, you want to summarize the ideas you've heard or you've read. Okay, you want to really distill them and get their essences down clearly. Try and avoid the straw man approach. If there's any obvious weakness, try not to disproportionately emphasize that. Some people do that, but try and produce a fair and objective representation of what you've learned. You then want to look at its internal strengths and weaknesses. What's good, what's not so good about what you've written down now. Your synopsis will show strengths and weaknesses in the original idea or argument. You then want to consider what's missing. In other words, there are so many ideas, maybe there's too many, maybe important things are missing. So have a look at that. And then the final part, where we go from being quite negative, if you like, quite critical, to being quite positive, is you use those 3 preceding sections, summarize strengths and weaknesses and what's missing, to make suggestions on how this idea or argument or model or tools and techniques can improve. So using criticism for some positive benefit. Now, you can catch almost anyone in the world with 2 very simple techniques. One, you want to listen very carefully when someone's talking for the first 5 minutes or so, maybe the first minute. There's almost always some unspoken assumption. So to create any idea, argument, lecture, book, what have you, there's almost always an unspoken assumption. Very often that's critical. In other words, it suggests a fatal flaw in the idea or argument. So listen really carefully, read really carefully, and think, what's the assumption underlying this? So underlying this course, for example, there's assumptions about the value of learning, that people want to learn, that these tools and techniques are all backed by research, and so on. Those are the kind of things I'm basing this course on. Now, there may be other assumptions I simply haven't considered, and that can be really important. Okay, so it's well worth thinking about. Also, when someone produces an argument, it's very hard to think about all the implications, and often when people write a book or produce a course or a lecture or what have you, they do think a bit about implications, but it's so hard to capture the most important ones. They've almost always missed something. Okay, so you can capture almost any person, almost any trainer, teacher, lecturer, organization, corporation, institution in its statements with these 2 systems, because they're so challenging to get right all the time. Okay, let's have an example now. So here again is a short text, and we're going to consider a critique of it. I'll read the text very, very quickly. The brain is a network. Better connected brains with faster connections make for smarter people. But the brain spills out of the skull via language, technology, tools, and so on. So this is the idea very quickly that if you need to buy milk on the way home, you might write a little aide de memoire, a little note saying, get milk on the way home. Your memory is now spilled out onto the page. So it's functionally equivalent to your brain, but it's on the page. So in other words, you've extended your mind, in this case memory, onto maybe a smartphone or a piece of paper, what have you. And that idea is called the extended mind, of a relatively well-established idea. We each create extensions of the mind, and by implication extensions of intelligence. Moreover, minds conjoin with others in this way to create collective intelligences. Just as the brain is a network, so is the collective mind. And just as network structures matter for individual brains, so they matter for the collective mind and its intelligence. Optimal network structures can be found in nature and in the brain, and their optimality proven with standard techniques in mathematics. In this way, the future of mankind, which surely depends on our ability to use our collective abilities wisely, is a product of optimized network cognition over space and time. So in the critique, just assume that the main ideas are well backed by research, the main ideas about brain and network structure and so on. So in critiquing this argument, in this example of text, first of all, you want to write a summary. Now, it's pretty short, so we'll write a very short summary. Cognitive networks matter to intelligence. Intelligence is networked in some form, and collective intelligence matters to the future of mankind. Okay, so there's a kind of summary. The paragraphs seem to be about cognitive networks. Strengths and weaknesses. Well, we've got big themes. They seem interesting and novel to me, and we're going to assume they're based on research. In other words, there's good, solid foundations for the argument. Weakness, clarity in the chain of the logic, if you like. The chain of argument isn't very, very clear. It's quite hard to follow in places. Then we move on to what's missing. Well, some images. If we're talking about networks in the brain, maybe we could have some kind of image or graphic to display that. Maybe we could define our terms. What does it mean? Intelligence and cognitive network and so on. It's not very clear. The references really should be in there. If it's a serious article, we want the academic references. Connections between ideas. So the flow of logic wasn't very clear. So how much do network structures correlate with intelligence? That's quite important. And how much does intelligence correlate with wisdom and good outcomes for mankind? That wasn't very clear. It was absent really from the argument. So to improve, add what's missing, plenty of things missing, and create simple structured logic in the flow of argument. Given the strength and scope of the claims, it's quite a big argument in the original paragraph. It would be useful to highlight exactly how they could be tested. So these ideas presumably are testable. So to be more convincing over time, be useful to test those ideas, and the article might suggest how. Now there's one critique. There are many ways to critique this example. That's just a demonstration of how to use the four-part critical system. Now, exercise 6.1, write a critique, use the four-step process we've just discussed, and try to critique an opinion piece, maybe in one of your favorite magazines, blogs, newspapers, what have you. So, strong opinion, pick something you're fond of, not something particularly bad, and just go for it aggressively with criticism. Then, as ever, reflect on it. What was easy? What was challenging about writing your critique? And how might you improve your critical faculties in future? Lesson 6 summary. Powerful and useful critiques can be created with this simple four-step process we've discussed. And as ever, practice is incredibly useful. In the next lesson, we look at asking useful questions.